Ethan Voss adjusted the oxygen filter on his helmet, the gritty wind of the alien planet whipping against his suit. His mission was supposed to be routine: survey the desolate wasteland, collect samples, and return to base. Yet something felt off. The air was too still, the silence pressing against his ears like a tangible weight. His instincts, honed through years of exploration and combat, screamed at him to turn back. But the mission demanded completion. A sudden shadow streaked across the horizon. Ethan froze, hand resting on the grip of his plasma pistol. The shadow moved again, faster this time, accompanied by a faint hum that reverberated through his boots. Before he could react, the ground beneath him cracked open, sending him tumbling into a cavern below. Darkness swallowed him whole. He groaned as he hit the rocky floor, his suit's impact dampeners sparing him from serious injury. As he scrambled to his feet, the cavern was suddenly bathed in a soft, otherworldly light. Ethan looked up to see sleek drones hovering above, their crystalline cores pulsating with energy. Before he could draw his weapon, a sharp burst of light blinded him. Then nothing. Ethan awoke to the sensation of cool metal beneath him. His head throbbed, and his limbs felt sluggish. As his vision cleared, he realized he was no longer on the planet's surface. The room around him was a seamless blend of smooth, glowing walls and intricate alien designs. Awake at last, a voice purred, smooth yet laced with an undertone of authority. Ethan turned his head sharply, finding himself face to face with a figure that was both alien and mesmerizing. She stood tall, her form lithe yet exuding strength. Her skin shimmered faintly, a deep violet hue that seemed to shift with the ambient light. Her eyes, large and luminescent, held his gaze with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded, his voice rough. "Where am I?" "I am Caliph," she replied, her tone calm but laced with urgency. "You are aboard my vessel. You've been chosen." "Chosen?" Ethan tried to sit up, but his body protested. "For what?" Caliph stepped closer, her movements graceful, almost hypnotic. "My people are dying, human. We face extinction. Our kind can no longer conceive. Not without help." She placed a hand over her chest, her voice softening. "You are that help." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You've got the wrong man. I didn't sign up to play savior." Caliph's expression didn't falter, though a flicker of something, desperation, crossed her features. "You don't understand. Your physiology is uniquely compatible with ours. If we do not act now, my people will perish." He scoffed. "And your solution is kidnapping?" Her gaze softened, and for a moment, the commanding presence gave way to vulnerability. "Would you not do the same for your kind? For those you love?" The question hit deeper than Ethan expected. Memories of his late wife and daughter surfaced, memories he had buried under years of duty and solitude. He clenched his jaw, pushing the pain aside. "I'm not interested in being anyone's savior," he muttered. Caliph knelt beside him, her proximity stirring a strange warmth in the air. "I'm not asking for your sacrifice," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Only your trust." Before he could respond, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his wrist. A jolt of sensation shot through him, a mix of warmth and an electric tingle. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was deeply unfamiliar. "What was that?" he asked, his breath hitching. "A form of communication," Caliph explained. "Your words are crude. We share emotions, sensations, through touch." She hesitated, her eyes searching his. "It is how we bond." Ethan pulled his hand away, the lingering sensation leaving his skin almost cold. "Bond? You're talking about something more than communication, aren't you?" Caliph nodded, her expression unreadable. "Yes, our connection must be both physical and emotional. Only then can new life begin." Ethan's heart pounded. The gravity of her words settled over him, mixing unease with a strange curiosity. He wasn't sure if it was the alien environment, the peculiar connection through touch, or Caliph herself, but he felt the walls he had built around himself beginning to crack. I don't know if I can do this, he admitted, his voice low. Caliph reached out again, but this time she paused, her hand hovering near his. You are not alone in this, Ethan Voss. I will guide you if you let me. The sound of distant alarms suddenly echoed through the chamber. Caliph's head snapped toward the door, her expression hardening. They've found us, she said, her voice now sharp. Who? Ethan asked, forcing himself to sit up despite the lingering ache in his muscles. Rivals within my people, she replied. They do not believe in the bond we seek to create. They would rather take you by force than see us succeed. Caliph moved quickly, helping Ethan to his feet. We must act now, she said. If they capture you, they will use you without care. I will not allow that. Ethan's pulse quickened, the tension in the air thick. Despite his initial resistance, a part of him felt a strange pull toward Caliph. Her determination, her vulnerability, and the mysterious bond they had begun to form stirred something within him. What do you need me to do? He asked, his voice steady now. Caliph looked at him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and resolve. Stay close to me, she said. Trust me. With that, she led him toward the glowing door, the sound of approaching footsteps growing louder. Ethan's mind raced with questions and doubts, but for now, he had no choice but to follow. He wasn't sure where this path would lead, but one thing was certain. His life had irrevocably changed. The sound of rushing footsteps echoed behind them as Caliph led Ethan down a narrow corridor, the ship's walls pulsating with soft light. Ethan's mind raced, but he forced himself to stay focused. Whoever these rivals were, they weren't here for a friendly chat. Caliph paused at an intersection, placing a hand on a glowing panel. The wall shifted, revealing a hidden passage. This way, she said, her voice low but urgent. They slipped inside, the panel ceiling behind them. The hum of energy surrounded them, the space dimly lit. Caliph pressed her hand against a control node, and the soft glow intensified, creating a warm, almost intimate atmosphere. Ethan leaned against the wall, catching his breath. I'm going to need more than vague explanations, he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Who are these people chasing us? What do they want with me? Caliph turned to him, her expression a mix of determination and guilt. They are a faction within my people who refuse to accept the necessity of bonding with humans. They see you as a resource, not a partner. To them, your consent is irrelevant. Ethan frowned. And you? What makes you different? Caliph hesitated, her luminous eyes searching his. I believe in the bond, she said softly. It's not just about survival. It's about connection. Without it, the new life we create would lack the essence of both our species. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither spoke. Ethan felt the weight of her gaze, the sincerity in her voice tugging at something deep within him. He wasn't sure why, but he believed her. Caliph stepped closer, her presence commanding yet gentle. Ethan, I know this is overwhelming, but if we are to succeed, I need your trust. Ethan studied her, the tension between them palpable. Trust takes time, he said. Caliph nodded. Then let us start with understanding. She raised her hand slowly, her fingers hovering near his. May I? Ethan hesitated, then gave a small nod. Caliph's fingers brushed against his, and the now familiar warmth spread through him. But this time the sensation was deeper, more intense. Images flickered in his mind, fragments of Caliph's memories. He saw glimpses of her homeworld, once vibrant and thriving, now desolate and silent. He felt her sorrow, her desperation, and her unwavering resolve to save her people. At the same time, Caliph experienced his memories. The loss of his family, the hollow ache of loneliness, the relentless pursuit of purpose in the void of space. Their shared pain created a bridge, a fragile yet undeniable connection. Ethan pulled back, his breathing uneven. That was intense. Caliph's eyes softened. Our bond allows us to share more than words. It is a deeper form of communication, one that transcends language. Ethan nodded slowly, the weight of their shared experiences settling over him. "All right," he said. "I'm still not sure what to make of all this, but I'm willing to see where it leads." Caliph gave a small, grateful smile. "Thank you." Before they could continue, the hum of the ship shifted, a low vibration signaling movement. Caliph's expression turned serious. "They've breached the outer perimeter. We don't have much time." Ethan straightened. "What's the plan?" Caliph moved to a control panel, her hands gliding over the surface. "We need to reach the core chamber. It's the only place where the bond ritual can be fully completed." "And what happens if we don't make it?" Ethan asked. Caliph's gaze was steady. "Then they will take you, and everything we've fought for will be lost." Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. "Let's not let that happen." They moved quickly through the hidden passage, the walls shifting and adapting to guide their path. The tension between them was thick, but there was also an unspoken understanding, a growing trust that neither could deny. As they approached the core chamber, Caliph paused, her hand resting on another control node. "Once we enter, there's no turning back," she said. "Are you ready?" Ethan met her gaze, the weight of the moment settling over him. "Let's do this." The door slid open, revealing a vast, glowing chamber. The air was warm, almost alive, and the soft hum of energy filled the space. In the center of the room, a crystalline structure pulsed with light, its rhythm mirroring a heartbeat. Caliph led Ethan to the center, her movements deliberate and calm. She turned to face him, her expression both serious and tender. "The bond ritual requires complete trust," she said. "You must let go of your fears, your doubts. Only then can we succeed." Ethan nodded, his pulse quickening. "What do I need to do?" Caliph stepped closer, her hands resting gently on his shoulders. "Close your eyes," she said softly. He did as she asked, the warmth of her touch grounding him. He felt her hands slide down his arms, her presence both soothing and electrifying. The hum of the chamber intensified, the energy around them building. Caliph's voice was a whisper, but it carried a weight that resonated deep within him. "Let go. Trust the bond." As the energy enveloped them, Ethan felt a shift, a merging of their minds and emotions. The connection was overwhelming, a cascade of sensations that left him breathless. He felt Caliph's strength, her determination, and her deep longing for connection. In return, she experienced his resilience, his capacity for love, and his hidden fears. The ritual was not just a physical act but an emotional and spiritual union. For a brief moment, they were one, their souls intertwined in a dance of light and warmth. When the energy subsided, Ethan opened his eyes, his breathing steady but his heart racing. Caliph's hands lingered on his arms, her gaze filled with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. "We are not finished," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we are closer." Ethan nodded, the weight of their journey pressing on him. "Then let's keep going," he said. Caliph gave a small, determined smile. "We will." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor, a reminder that their enemies were still close. Together, they turned toward the exit, ready to face whatever came next. The sound of footsteps grew louder as Ethan and Caliph moved swiftly through the glowing corridors of the ship. The energy from the partially completed ritual still lingered between them, a subtle warmth that seemed to guide their movements. Every step felt synchronized, as if their connection had attuned them to each other's presence. Caliph glanced over her shoulder, her expression focused but calm. "We're close to the secondary passage. It will take us to a safer location," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Ethan nodded, gripping the sidearm she had handed him earlier. "I'm assuming safer is relative." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "You assume correctly." They reached a junction where Caliph placed her hand on another glowing panel. The wall shifted, revealing a hidden passage just as the first figures of their pursuers appeared at the far end of the corridor. "Go," Caliph urged, pushing Ethan forward. He didn't hesitate, stepping into the narrow passage. Caliph followed, sealing the wall behind them. The hum of energy from the ship's systems dampened the sound of their heavy breathing as they pressed onward. The passage opened into a small, circular chamber. Ethan scanned the room, noting the intricate symbols etched into the walls and the faint glow that emanated from the floor. "This place doesn't scream safe house," he muttered. Caliph approached the center of the chamber, her hands moving over the controls. "It's not meant to. This is a sanctuary. A place where bonds are strengthened and protected." She paused, her eyes meeting his. "We're going to complete the ritual here." Ethan's grip tightened on the sidearm. "Are you sure we have time for that?" Caliph stepped closer, her presence grounding yet intense. "If we don't, they will overpower us. The bond we've begun is our only defense. Once it's complete, they will not be able to take you from me." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Ethan's gaze flicked to the sealed entrance, then back to Caliph. "All right," he said, lowering the weapon. "Let's finish what we started." Caliph nodded, relief and determination flickering in her eyes. She guided Ethan to stand opposite her, the faint glow from the chamber's floor intensifying. "This time you must trust me completely," she said softly. "No resistance, no fear." Ethan exhaled slowly, nodding. "I'm with you." Caliph extended her hands, and Ethan took them without hesitation. Her skin was warm, the energy between them sparking to life the moment they touched. The glow from the floor rose around them, enveloping them in a cocoon of light. Ethan felt the connection deepen, their shared emotions and memories flowing freely. It was like stepping into a river, the current carrying them to a place beyond physical boundaries. Caliph's presence was all-encompassing, her emotions a symphony of strength, hope, and desire. He saw flashes of her life, her struggles as a leader, the weight of her people's survival resting on her shoulders. He felt her longing for connection, for a partner who could stand beside her in both vulnerability and strength. In turn, Caliph experienced Ethan's memories more vividly. His wife's laughter, the ache of losing her, the hollow years spent chasing purpose in the stars. She saw his resilience, his unyielding will to protect those he cared for. The bond grew stronger, their breaths synchronizing as they moved closer. Caliph's hands slid to his arms, her touch lingering as she looked up at him. "You are more than I ever hoped for," she said, her voice a whisper. Ethan didn't reply with words. Instead, he closed the distance between them, his hand gently cupping her face. Caliph leaned into his touch, her eyes searching his as the energy around them pulsed in time with their heartbeats. Slowly, Ethan lowered his head, their foreheads touching. The moment stretched, the world outside the chamber fading away. When their lips finally met, it was a gentle, deliberate connection, a silent promise shared between them. The kiss deepened, and the energy around them flared, the bond reaching its zenith. It wasn't just physical. It was an exchange of souls, a merging of two beings into something greater. When they finally pulled apart, the glow around them softened, the ritual complete. Caliph's eyes shimmered with unspoken emotion as she pressed her forehead against his. "It is done," she whispered. Ethan nodded, his voice steady. "We're in this together now." Caliph smiled, a mix of relief and affection in her expression. But the moment of calm was short-lived. The hum of the chamber shifted, signaling that their pursuers were closing in. "They won't stop," Ethan said, his grip tightening on the sidearm once more. "No," Caliph agreed, "but they won't be able to sever our bond. Together, we are stronger than they anticipated." The chamber's entrance began to pulse, a sign that the rival faction was attempting to breach their sanctuary. Caliph moved to the controls, her hands a blur as she activated the chamber's defenses. "We hold them here," she said firmly. "They cannot take what they do not understand." Ethan stood by her side, ready for whatever came next. The bond they had forged was more than a shield. It was a weapon, and together, they would face the storm. The chamber vibrated as the rival faction pressed their assault on the sanctuary's entrance. The pulsing hum of Caliph's defensive systems grew louder, their protective barrier flickering in response to the outside pressure. Ethan stood at the ready, sidearm in hand, his eyes locked on the sealed door. Caliph worked swiftly at the control panel, her fingers dancing over the glowing symbols. "The barrier will hold for now," she said, her voice calm but focused. "But we'll need to prepare for when it fails." Ethan glanced at her, the glow from the chamber highlighting the determination etched into her features. "Any chance we can reason with them?" Caliph shook her head. "They've chosen their path. They see our bond as a threat to their control. Their only goal is to separate us and use you for their own ends." Ethan tightened his grip on the weapon. "Then we make sure that doesn't happen." Caliph paused, her hands stilling on the panel. She turned to face him, stepping closer. "The bond we've created is more than a shield, Ethan. Connects us in ways they cannot comprehend." He nodded, his expression softening. "EVFET. It's like we're two halves of the same force." Caliph reached out, her hand resting lightly on his chest. "Exactly. And together we can amplify that force." Ethan felt the warmth of her touch spread through him, a steady pulse of energy that resonated with the core of his being. He covered her hand with his, their connection grounding him in the moment. "Tell me what I need to do." Caliph smiled, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Focus on the bond. Trust in our connection. When the time comes, we'll channel our combined energy to drive them back." A sudden surge of energy from the door pulled their attention back to the immediate threat. The barrier flickered, and a loud crack reverberated through the chamber. "They're getting closer," Ethan said, stepping back into a defensive position. Caliph returned to the controls, her movements precise. "We'll need to force them into a narrow point when they breach. It will give us the advantage." The tension in the room grew as the barrier flickered again, the light dimming for a moment before flaring back to full strength. The rival faction was relentless, and it was only a matter of time before they broke through. Ethan moved to Caliph's side. "If we're going to make a stand, we do it together." Caliph looked up at him, her expression softening despite the urgency of the situation. "Always." The sanctuary door trembled, the pulsing light of the barrier dimming further with each impact. Caliph's hands never stopped moving, her focus unwavering as she adjusted the defenses. Then, with a deafening crash, the barrier shattered. The door burst open, and the rival faction surged in, their sleek forms illuminated by the chamber's glow. They moved with precision, their eyes locked on Ethan. Ethan raised his weapon, firing controlled bursts that forced the intruders to scatter. Caliph stepped forward, her hands glowing with a soft light as she activated the sanctuary's inner defenses. Energy fields erupted around the chamber, creating barriers that funneled the attackers into a single line of approach. "Now, Ethan," Caliph called out. He didn't hesitate. He stepped into position beside her, their bond flaring to life. The energy between them pulsed, a tangible force that filled the room. Ethan felt it in every fiber of his being, an unyielding connection that gave him strength and clarity. Caliph reached out, her hand brushing against his. The moment their skin touched, the energy surged, a wave of light and heat that radiated outward. The attackers faltered, their advance slowing as the force of the bond pushed against them. Ethan could feel Caliph's presence in his mind, her calm guidance merging with his instincts. Together, they channeled the energy, driving the intruders back step by step. The room vibrated with the intensity of their combined power, the glow from the chamber growing brighter with each pulse. The lead attacker stumbled, their form flickering as they tried to resist the bond's force. Caliph seized the moment, her voice strong and commanding. "You will not break us." With a final surge of energy, the intruders were pushed back through the door, their forms scattering like shadows in the light. The sanctuary door sealed shut behind them, the defensive barriers reactivating. Ethan lowered his weapon, his breathing heavy. "Is it over?" Caliph stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "For now. They won't be able to breach the sanctuary again without significant reinforcements." Ethan nodded, his tension easing as the reality of their victory settled in. "We held them off." Caliph smiled, her eyes reflecting both relief and pride. "We did more than that. We proved the strength of our bond." The chamber's glow softened, the energy settling into a steady rhythm. Ethan felt the warmth of Calith's presence beside him, their connection a constant reassurance. "We'll need to stay vigilant," Calith said, her tone serious but calm. "They won't give up easily." Ethan met her gaze, the weight of their journey reflected in her eyes. "Then we face whatever comes next together." Calith nodded, her expression resolute. Together, as the chamber settled into a calm stillness, Ethan knew that this was only the beginning. The bond they had forged was powerful, but it would be tested again. And when it was, he and Calith would stand as one, ready to protect each other and the future they were fighting to build. The sanctuary hummed with a quiet energy, its protective barriers fully restored. Ethan leaned against the wall, his chest rising and falling as he tried to catch his breath. The adrenaline from their confrontation still coursed through him, leaving his hands slightly trembling. He looked over at Calith, who was meticulously adjusting the controls at the center of the chamber. She glanced up, her eyes meeting his with a softness that contrasted the intensity of their recent battle. "You fought well," she said, her voice low but filled with warmth. Ethan gave a short nod, his lips curving into a faint smile. "Not my first time in a fight, but I'll admit, this was a bit different." Calith stepped away from the console, her movements fluid as she approached him. The air between them felt charged, but not with tension, with something deeper. "The bond made us stronger," she said, stopping just a step away from him. "But it's not just a tool for battle. It's a connection that requires trust, even in moments of peace." Ethan straightened, his eyes searching hers. "I felt it. In the fight, it was like you were guiding me, showing me what to do without saying a word." Calith nodded, a faint smile gracing her lips. "That's the bond. It links us on a level beyond thought, beyond language." For a moment, they stood in silence, the hum of the sanctuary the only sound. Then Calith reached out, her hand brushing lightly against his. The touch was gentle, but it sent a familiar warmth through Ethan's body, grounding him in the present. "You've come far in a short time," she said softly. "But there is still more to learn, more to trust." Ethan's gaze softened, and he turned his hand to clasp hers. "Then teach me," he said. "I'm here, Calith. I'm with you." Calith's eyes shimmered, and she guided him to the center of the chamber. "The ritual we completed strengthened our bond, but it's not static. It grows with us, adapting to our emotions and our connection." She paused, placing his hand over the glowing console. The symbols beneath his palm shifted, responding to his touch. "Feel the energy," she said. "Let it flow through you. The sanctuary amplifies our bond, helps us align." Ethan closed his eyes, focusing on the warmth beneath his hand. He could feel the energy, a steady pulse that seemed to echo his heartbeat. Slowly, it merged with Calith's presence, her own energy weaving into his like threads of light. As the connection deepened, Ethan felt a rush of sensations. Memories, emotions, fragments of Calith's thoughts. He saw glimpses of her world, her people, the weight she carried as a leader. But there was also hope, a fragile but persistent light that shone brightly in her. Calith stepped closer, her hands resting lightly on his arms. "Do you see?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper. Ethan opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. "I see you," he said, his voice steady. "Everything you've been through, everything you're fighting for." Calith's expression softened, and she moved even closer, their proximity charged with unspoken emotion. "And I see you, Ethan. Your strength, your pain, your resolve. Together, we are more than we were alone." Ethan's hand lifted almost instinctively, his fingers brushing against her cheek. Calith leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment. When she opened them again, there was a depth to her gaze that made Ethan's pulse quicken. Slowly, she raised her hands to his face, her touch featherlight as her fingers traced the line of his jaw. "Our bond isn't just about survival," she said softly. "It's about trust, connection, and something more." Ethan felt his throat tighten, his heart pounding in his chest. He leaned in, his forehead resting gently against hers. "Caliph?" he murmured, her name a promise on his lips. She tilted her head, her eyes closing as their lips met in a slow, deliberate kiss. The warmth between them flared, the bond amplifying every sensation. It wasn't just a kiss. It was an exchange of emotion, of trust and vulnerability. When they finally pulled apart, Calipha's hands remained on his face, her thumbs brushing against his cheekbones. "You are unlike any human I've ever known," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan smiled, his hand moving to rest on her waist. "And you're unlike anyone I've ever met, alien or otherwise." They stood in the center of the chamber, the glow around them pulsing softly in rhythm with their connection. For the first time since his abduction, Ethan felt a sense of peace, a certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be. Caliph eventually stepped back, though her hand lingered on his arm. "We should rest," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "The bond requires energy, and we'll need our strength for what comes next." Ethan nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. "Yeah, something tells me our enemies aren't giving up anytime soon." Caliph's expression darkened slightly, a flicker of concern crossing her face. "They will come again, and when they do, they'll be more determined than ever." Ethan squeezed her hand, offering a reassuring smile. "Then we'll be ready. Together." Caliph's gaze softened, and she gave a small nod. "Together," she echoed. As they settled into the quiet hum of the sanctuary, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. But for now, he allowed himself to take solace in the connection they had forged, the bond that had become their greatest strength. The calm within the sanctuary was deceptive, the quiet hum of the ship masking the storm that brewed beyond its walls. Ethan stood near the central console, his mind restless despite the stillness of the room. Caliph had stepped away to review the sanctuary's defenses, her focus unwavering as she prepared for the inevitable return of their pursuers. Ethan's thoughts drifted as he stared at the glowing symbols beneath his fingers. The bond he shared with Caliph was unlike anything he had ever experienced, a connection so deep it felt as though their souls had intertwined. He could sense her even when she wasn't near, a constant, comforting presence that steadied him in this strange new reality. Caliph approached quietly, her footsteps soft against the sanctuary's floor. "The defenses are holding, but their next attack will be stronger," she said, her voice breaking through his thoughts. Ethan turned to face her, his expression serious. "How much time do we have?" She hesitated, her eyes meeting his. "Not long. They're regrouping, likely planning a more coordinated assault." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. "Then we make every second count." Caliph stepped closer, her gaze searching his face. "There's something you should know," she said softly. "The bond we formed. It's changing us, strengthening us, but it also makes us a target. They fear what we've become together." Ethan's brows furrowed. "Why? What are they so afraid of?" Caliph's hand lifted, her fingers brushing lightly against his temple. "They fear the unknown. Our bond is unprecedented, it defies their control, their expectations. It's a power they cannot replicate or understand." Ethan felt the warmth of her touch spread through him, steadying his resolve. "Then we use that to our advantage," he said. "Whatever they're planning, we face it together." Caliph smiled, a flicker of admiration in her eyes. "You continue to surprise me, Ethan Voss." Before he could respond, the sanctuary's hum shifted, a low vibration signaling a disturbance in the outer defenses. Caliph's expression darkened as she moved swiftly to the console, her hands gliding over the controls. "They're testing the barriers," she said, her tone calm but urgent. "They're probing for weaknesses." Ethan joined her, his eyes scanning the readouts. "Can we hold them off?" Caliph nodded. "For now. But if they breach the outer layer, we'll need to act quickly." The tension in the room thickened as the vibrations grew more pronounced. Ethan could feel the energy in the air, a palpable force that mirrored the anticipation building within him. He placed a hand on Caliph's shoulder, drawing her attention. "We've faced them before," he said, "and we'll face them again." Kalitha's gaze softened, and she placed her hand over his. "Together," she said, her voice steady. A sudden surge of energy jolted the sanctuary, the lights flickering as the outer barrier was breached. Kalitha's hands flew across the console, activating the secondary defenses. The walls of the sanctuary pulsed with a bright, protective glow, but Ethan could sense the strain it placed on the system. "There through the first layer," Kalith said, her focus sharp. "The second barrier will hold, but it won't last indefinitely." Ethan's grip on his sidearm tightened. "What's the plan?" Kalith glanced at him, a determined glint in her eyes. "We draw them into the inner chamber. The sanctuary's core will amplify our bond, giving us the strength to push them back." Ethan nodded, his resolve firm. "Let's do it." As the sanctuary's defenses continued to pulse, Kalith led Ethan to the center of the chamber. The air around them grew warmer, charged with the energy of the sanctuary's core. Ethan could feel their bond strengthening, the connection between them deepening with each passing moment. Kalith placed her hands on his shoulders, her touch grounding him. "Focus on the bond," she said, her voice steady. "Let it guide you." Ethan closed his eyes, drawing in a deep breath. He could feel the energy flowing between them, a powerful current that seemed to hum in harmony with the sanctuary's core. Kalitha's presence filled his mind, her strength and determination bolstering his own. The sound of footsteps echoed from beyond the chamber, signaling the arrival of their pursuers. Ethan opened his eyes, his grip tightening on his weapon. Kalith stepped back, her hands glowing with a soft, radiant light. "They're coming," she said, her voice calm but resolute. The chamber door trembled as the enemy forces began their assault. The glow of the sanctuary's defenses intensified, creating a barrier that held them at bay for the moment. Ethan and Kalith stood side by side, their bond a steady anchor in the storm. As the first wave of attackers breached the door, Kalith raised her hands, releasing a surge of energy that sent them reeling. Ethan followed suit, his sidearm firing with precision as they fought back the intruders. The room pulsed with light and energy, the power of their bond driving their movements. The battle was fierce, but Ethan and Kalith fought with unwavering determination. Each time the enemy advanced, they were met with a powerful counterattack, the strength of the bond amplifying their efforts. The sanctuary's core pulsed in rhythm with their connection, a beacon of light that pushed back the darkness. Finally, as the last of the attackers fell, the chamber fell silent once more. The sanctuary's defenses stabilized, the glow of the core returning to a steady pulse. Ethan lowered his weapon, his breathing heavy as he surveyed the room. Kalith stepped forward, her hands still glowing faintly. She placed a hand on his arm, her touch a comforting presence. "We did it," she said softly. Ethan nodded, his gaze meeting hers. "For now. But they'll be back." Kalitha's expression was serious, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Let them come. Together, we'll face whatever challenges lie ahead." As the sanctuary settled into quiet once more, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The bond they had forged was more than a connection. It was a source of strength, a beacon of hope in a universe fraught with danger. And as long as they stood together, he knew they could overcome anything. The sanctuary was still, its glow dimmed to a steady pulse as Ethan and Kalith stood together in the aftermath of the battle. The silence was heavy, yet it brought with it a brief sense of reprieve. Ethan's grip on his sidearm loosened as he exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Kalith lowered her hands, the faint light that had surrounded her fading. She moved toward the center console, her steps deliberate but slower now, the weight of their struggle evident in her movements. Ethan followed, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of lingering threats. "They'll regroup," Kalith said, her voice quiet but resolute. "Their resolve will only strengthen after this defeat." Ethan nodded, setting the weapon on a nearby ledge. "Then we'll be ready for them," he said. "But for now, we need to recover." Kalitha's fingers moved over the glowing symbols of the console, recalibrating the sanctuary's defenses. The light around them grew slightly brighter as the system stabilized. When she was done, She turned to face Ethan, her expression softening. "You fought with great strength," she said, stepping closer. "Our bond has made you a force they cannot easily overcome." Ethan shrugged lightly, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Couldn't have done it without you," he said. "Seems like this bond thing works both ways." Calith's lips curved into a small smile, but there was a trace of weariness in her eyes. She reached out, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You've adapted quickly, Ethan. More quickly than I anticipated." Ethan's gaze met hers, and for a moment, the room seemed to shrink, the energy between them drawing them closer. He could feel the warmth of her touch, the steady rhythm of their connection grounding him. "Had a good teacher," he said quietly. Calith's smile widened slightly, and she let her hand linger before stepping back. "We should rest while we can," she said, her tone more serious now. "The bond requires energy, and we'll need to be at full strength for what's to come." Ethan nodded, though he could sense there was more on her mind. "You're worried about something," he said, studying her. Calith hesitated, her gaze dropping briefly before meeting his again. "There is something I haven't told you," she admitted. "The bond, it's evolving. As we grow closer, its effects become more profound." Ethan tilted his head, his brow furrowing. "What kind of effects?" Calith moved to the console, her hands resting on the edge as she spoke. "It's not just about strength or connection. The bond has the power to heal, to enhance. But it also ties us together in ways that cannot be undone. If one of us falters, the other will feel it." Ethan stepped closer, his concern evident. "You're saying we're linked even more than we realized?" Calith nodded. "Yes, it's a gift, but also a responsibility. We must protect each other, not just in battle, but in all things." Ethan absorbed her words, the weight of their situation settling over him once more. "Then we'll protect each other," he said firmly. "Whatever this bond brings, we'll face it together." Calith turned to him, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and determination. "Thank you, Ethan. Your trust means more than you know." He gave a small nod, his hand briefly brushing against hers. "We're in this together. No turning back now." The moment lingered between them, their shared resolve solidifying the connection that bound them. Calith finally stepped back, her focus shifting to a smaller chamber connected to the sanctuary's core. "There is a resting area through here," she said, motioning for him to follow. "It will allow us to recover while remaining connected to the sanctuary's energy." Ethan followed her into the adjoining space, which was dimly lit and designed for comfort. The walls emitted a soft, soothing light, and the air was warm, almost serene. A central platform rose slightly from the floor, its surface cushioned and inviting. Calith gestured to the platform. "The sanctuary's core extends here, providing a constant flow of energy to aid in recovery." Ethan approached, sitting on the edge of the platform and letting out a low sigh. The weight of the recent battle pressed on him, but the atmosphere of the room was already beginning to ease his tension. Calith joined him, her presence a steady reassurance. For a while, they sat in silence, the quiet hum of the sanctuary filling the space. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the room and the steady pulse of their bond soothe his mind. Calith remained close, her own breathing slowing as she allowed herself to relax. After a time, Ethan opened his eyes, glancing over at her. "You've been carrying this burden for a long time," he said softly. "It can't have been easy." Calith's gaze remained forward, her expression contemplative. "It hasn't been," she admitted, "but knowing I'm not alone anymore, it makes a difference." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle but firm. "You're not alone, Calith. Not anymore." She turned to him, her eyes shining with unspoken emotion. "And neither are you, Ethan." The connection between them seemed to hum with renewed intensity, a quiet but powerful reminder of the bond they shared. As they sat together in the sanctuary's resting chamber, a sense of calm settled over them, even as they knew the challenges ahead were far from over. For now, they allowed themselves this moment of peace, drawing strength from each other and the unbreakable connection that bound them. The sanctuary's resting chamber exuded a tranquil warmth, its soft glow cocooning Ethan and Caliph in a moment of peace. The hum of the sanctuary's energy resonated faintly around them, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to mirror the steady beat of their hearts. For a brief while, the weight of their situation lifted, replaced by a calm that allowed them to simply exist in each other's presence. Ethan leaned back on the cushioned platform, his gaze fixed on the softly illuminated ceiling. His body still ached from the battle, but the exhaustion was tempered by the quiet strength he felt through the bond. It was as though Caliph's presence within him was a soothing balm, easing his tension and renewing his resolve. Caliph sat beside him, her legs tucked neatly beneath her. She watched him in silence for a moment, her luminous eyes reflecting the ambient light. "You've adapted remarkably well," she said softly, breaking the quiet. "Most would struggle to adjust to the bond, but you've embraced it." Ethan turned his head to meet her gaze, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "It helps having someone like you guiding me through it," he said. "I've had to adapt to a lot of things in my life, but it feels different, feels right." Caliph's expression softened, and she shifted slightly, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Our bond is unlike any connection I've known," she said. "It's more than just a tool for survival. It's a partnership, one that strengthens us both." Ethan reached up, covering her hand with his. "Then we keep building it," he said. "No matter what comes, we face it together." She nodded, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer before she withdrew her hand. "There's something else I need to tell you," she said, her tone more serious now. "The bond isn't just strengthening us, it's changing us." Ethan sat up slightly, his brows knitting together. "Changing us how?" Caliph hesitated, her hands clasped loosely in her lap. "The bond enhances our physical and emotional connection, but it also has consequences. It's creating a new kind of energy within us, one that my people have never encountered before." Ethan frowned. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" Caliph's lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't know yet. The energy could be a source of great power, but it's also unpredictable. My people's history speaks of ancient bonds that led to immense strength, but they were lost to time. We're venturing into unknown territory." Ethan absorbed her words, his mind racing. "So, we're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're dealing with something that could change everything." Caliph nodded. "Yes, and it's why the rival faction is so determined to stop us. They fear what we represent, a future they cannot control." Ethan's jaw tightened, his resolve hardening. "Then we make sure they don't get the chance to control it. Whatever this energy is, we'll figure it out together." Caliph's gaze softened, and she reached out once more, her hand brushing against his cheek. "Thank you, Ethan. Your strength gives me hope." He turned his head slightly, his lips pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "You've given me something to fight for," he said. "That's all the strength I need." Their moment of quiet connection was interrupted by a sudden surge in the sanctuary's energy. The hum grew louder, more urgent, and Caliph's eyes widened as she turned toward the console. "They're attacking again," she said, her voice tense. Ethan was already on his feet, grabbing his sidearm. "How bad?" Caliph moved quickly to the console, her fingers flying over the controls. "They've breached the outer defenses and are concentrating their assault on the core barriers. They're more coordinated this time." Ethan stood beside her, his gaze focused on the display. "We've held them off before. We'll do it again." Caliph nodded, but there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. "The energy from our bond is stabilizing the core, but if they break through the barriers, they could destabilize everything." Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then we don't let them break through." Caliph's expression steadied, and she activated the sanctuary's inner defenses. "I'll amplify the barriers with the core's energy, but it will draw on our bond. We'll need to stay connected." Ethan gave a short nod. "Got it. Let's do this." As the sanctuary's defenses flared to life, the room was bathed in a brilliant light. The hum of energy grew louder, a steady rhythm that seemed to sync with Ethan and Caliph's breathing. They stood side by side, their bond a palpable force that pulsed between them. The first wave of attackers breached the outer chamber, their forms silhouetted against the glowing barriers. Caliph raised her hands, channeling the core's energy through the bond. A surge of light erupted from her, pushing the intruders back. Ethan moved with precision, firing controlled bursts at the enemy as they regrouped. Each shot was guided by the intuitive connection he shared with Caliph, their movements perfectly synchronized. The battle raged on, the sanctuary's walls trembling under the strain. Caliph's focus never wavered, her energy flowing seamlessly with Ethan's. Together, they were an unbreakable force, driving back the enemy with every surge of power. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last of the attackers fell. The sanctuary's barriers stabilized, and the hum of energy began to subside. Ethan lowered his weapon, his breathing heavy as he surveyed the room. Caliph stood beside him, her hands still glowing faintly. She placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "It's over," she said softly. Ethan nodded, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. For now, Caliph's expression was serious, but there was a quiet determination in her eyes. "They'll return, stronger than before, but so will we." Ethan met her gaze, his resolve mirrored in her own. "Then we keep fighting," he said. "Together." Caliph smiled, a small but genuine expression of gratitude and trust. Together. As the sanctuary settled into quiet once more, Ethan and Caliph stood side by side, their bond stronger than ever. The challenges ahead were great, but with each battle, they grew closer, their connection a beacon of hope in an uncertain future. The sanctuary hummed softly in the aftermath of the battle, its walls pulsating with a steady rhythm, as though it, too, was breathing a sigh of relief. Ethan and Caliph stood together in the center of the chamber, their hands intertwined, drawing strength from their connection. The air was thick with the energy they had channeled, but now it began to settle, leaving a profound stillness in its wake. Ethan glanced at Caliph, her luminous skin catching the ambient light. Despite the exhaustion etched on her face, she carried herself with the quiet grace of someone who had weathered countless storms. He tightened his grip on her hand. "We've bought ourselves time," he said, his voice steady. "But I get the feeling this isn't over." Caliph nodded, her expression resolute. "It's not. They'll regroup and return more determined than ever. But so will we." She stepped closer, her other hand resting lightly against his chest. "Our bond is growing stronger with every challenge. Together, we've become something they fear." Ethan allowed himself a small smile. "Good. Let them fear us." For a moment, they simply stood there, the weight of their shared experiences settling over them. The bond between them pulsed softly, a comforting presence that reminded them they were no longer alone in this fight. Caliph eventually pulled back, her gaze shifting to the console at the edge of the chamber. "There's something I need to show you," she said, moving toward it. "Our bond isn't just changing us. It's altering the sanctuary as well." Ethan followed her, curiosity piqued. "Altering how?" Caliph activated the console, and the room dimmed slightly as a series of holographic symbols and patterns appeared before them. "The energy we've generated through our bond is integrating with the sanctuary's core systems," she explained. "It's unlocking ancient capabilities, ones my people have long forgotten." Ethan studied the display, his eyes narrowing as he tried to make sense of the alien symbols. "Capabilities like what?" Caliph's hands moved over the console, bringing up a new set of images. Enhanced defenses, advanced communications, even the potential to manipulate energy fields on a massive scale. She turned to him, her expression both hopeful and cautious. "But there's more. The sanctuary is beginning to respond to us in ways that suggest a symbiosis." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Symbiosis? You mean the sanctuary's becoming part of us?" Caliph nodded. "In a sense, yes. Our bond is acting as a catalyst, merging our energies with the sanctuary's. It's why we've been able to repel the attackers so effectively. The sanctuary amplifies our strength, and in return, we stabilize its systems." Ethan took a step back, letting her words sink in. That's a lot to take in. But if it gives us an edge, I'm all for it. Kalith smiled, a rare warmth in her otherwise composed demeanor. It does. And it means that together, we can protect not only ourselves but also the future we're fighting for. Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. Then we keep pushing forward. Whatever this bond brings, we'll face it head-on. Kalith reached out, her hand resting lightly on his arm. I knew from the moment we bonded that you were different, Ethan, but you've shown a strength and resilience that exceeds anything I could have imagined. Ethan met her gaze, his own expression softening. I'm not sure I would have made it this far without you, Kalith. You've given me something to fight for again. Her eyes shimmered, and for a brief moment, the weight of their shared struggle melted away. She leaned in, her forehead resting gently against his. We've given each other something worth protecting. Ethan's hand lifted, his fingers brushing against her cheek. Their bond pulsed softly between them, a steady rhythm that spoke of trust, unity, and something deeper that neither of them could yet put into words. The moment was interrupted by a sudden surge in the sanctuary's energy. Kalith straightened, her attention snapping back to the console. The core is stabilizing, but there's a new anomaly, she said, her fingers flying over the controls. Ethan peered over her shoulder. Anomaly? What kind of anomaly? Kalith frowned, her eyes scanning the readouts. It's an energy signature I've never seen before. It's coming from deep within the sanctuary, a place that's been sealed off for centuries. Ethan's instincts kicked in. Is it a threat? Kalith shook her head slowly. I don't think so. Feels familiar, as if it's tied to the bond somehow. Ethan straightened, his hand resting on his sidearm. Then we should check it out. Kalith hesitated, her gaze flicking to the sealed door at the far end of the chamber. If we do this, we'll be venturing into the heart of the sanctuary. There's no telling what we'll find. Ethan offered her a reassuring smile. We've come this far. No point in turning back now. Kalith's lips curved into a faint smile, and she nodded. Very well. Let's see what the sanctuary has been hiding. Together, they moved toward the sealed door. As they approached, the bond between them flared, the energy pulsing more intensely than before. Kalith placed her hand on the door, and it responded immediately, the symbols along its surface glowing brightly. The door slid open, revealing a long corridor bathed in a soft, golden light. The air was warm, almost inviting, and the hum of energy grew louder as they stepped inside. Ethan glanced at Kalith. Whatever's in here, it's powerful. Kalith nodded, her expression a mix of curiosity and awe. This is the sanctuary's heart. It holds the key to everything. They moved cautiously down the corridor, their steps echoing softly. At the end of the passage, they entered a vast chamber filled with intricate patterns of light and energy. In the center of the room stood a towering crystalline structure, its surface shimmering with a spectrum of colors. Kalith approached it slowly, her hand outstretched. This is the source of the anomaly, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's ancient, and it's alive. Ethan stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the crystalline structure. Alive? Kalith nodded, her hand resting gently on its surface. It's connected to us, to the bond. And it's waiting. Ethan felt the pulse of energy intensify, a steady rhythm that matched the beat of his heart. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. Their journey was far from over. Together, they would unlock the sanctuary's true power and face whatever challenges awaited them.